Hey everyone. So today I'm going to give a quick overview of some of the philosophical dispute concerning the problem of evil. We're going to be looking at J.L. Mackie's paper, Evil and Omnipotence, and Peter van Inwagen's paper, The Problem of Evil. Okay, so first of all, what is the problem of evil? Well, according to the definition of theism, God is supposed to be both omnibenevolent and omnipotent. Now, his omnibenevolence would suggest that God would be the sort of being who would want to reduce the greatest amount of evil that he can. Also, his omnipotence would suggest that he is capable of preventing any evil that he would want to reduce. So, if we put these two thoughts together, they would suggest that if God existed, then we would not expect for there to be very much evil, if any, in the world. And yet, we observe evil, and we observe lots of it. So with these observations, we may perhaps have some reason to doubt that theism is true. I'd like to stress from the outset, though, that this is just a rough description of the problem of evil. When we go on to make these ideas more precise by articulating an argument with specific premises and a specific conclusion, we'll find that there is not just one argument that is the problem of evil. There are, in fact, many different arguments that stem from considerations about evil that are supposed to be evidence for atheism. And this is very important to bear in mind, because it means that the theist cannot simply offer one response to the problem of evil and then call it a day. Whether any response that a theist gives to the problem of evil will depend on which version of the problem of evil they're responding to. A response to one version of the problem of evil may not work as a response to a different version of the problem of evil. All right. Okay, so let's first examine one particular version of the argument of evil that comes from J.L. Mackie's paper. What's important to see about Mackie's version of the problem of evil is that, according to him, the problem of evil is a logical problem. He writes that, in its simplest form, the problem is this: God is omnipotent, God is wholly good, and yet evil exists. There seems to be some contradiction between these three propositions, so that if any two of them were true, the third would have to be false. In sum, Mackie thinks that the existence of God is logically inconsistent with the existence of evil, and he thinks that he can show this just by looking at the definition of God. Another way to put this claim by Mackie is that from the premise evil exists, and from other premises that are contained just in the definition of God alone, he thinks he can construct a deductively valid argument for the conclusion that God does not exist. All right, so how does he do this? In the first part of his paper, he provides some premises, and the argument that he alludes to, it goes like this. Premise 1. A good thing will eliminate evil as far as it can. Premise 2. There are no limits to what an omnipotent thing can do. And then from premises 1 and 2, he gets premise 3. A good omnipotent thing eliminates evil completely. From this, we get that if God, who is by definition a good omnipotent thing, if God exists, then evil does not exist. And yet, evil exists. Therefore, God does not exist. It is important to see that Mackie has extremely high ambitions with this argument. He has made a very bold claim. According to him, it isn't even logically possible for God to coexist with evil. And he thinks that any theist who thinks otherwise isn't really taking the definition of God seriously enough. Since the publication of Mackie's paper, many theists and atheists alike have argued that Mackie's claim is far too strong. And to show that it is too strong, all they need to do is provide one way in which it's at least possible for God to coexist with evil. They do not need to show that God's coexistence with evil is likely or even that it's plausible. All they need to do to show Lackey's strong claim to be wrong is to show that it's at least possible. If they can do that, then Mackie's claim to have given a logically deductive argument from evil to atheism has overstepped. So, the most common way for the theist to respond to an argument like Mackie's is to point out that God's omnibenevolence doesn't imply, as just a mere matter of definition, that God will eliminate all evil. It's possible that some evils are necessary for God to attain even greater goods. For example, the pain of having your wisdom teeth removed is a little bit of evil, but it's necessary for it's necessary to have that pain in order to attain the greater good of long-term dental health. And so the dentist who removes your wisdom teeth is doing something good, even though her good act coincided with some measure of necessary pain. The main point of examples like this is to say that Mackie's first premise is suspect. Mackie claims that a good thing will eliminate literally all evils that it can. But that's actually a very strong claim. What seems to be actually true is the weaker claim that an omnibenevolent being will eliminate an evil unless they have some morally good reason to allow that evil to occur. All right, so having made that first point on behalf of the theist, Mackie has to say something in response in order to shore up his argument. And in the last portion of his paper, he does consider objections like this, and he has his own replies to offer. And other atheists have gone on to develop other versions of the problem of evil that will try to work around this problem. I think it's fair to say nowadays that there are fewer atheist philosophers who are as bold as Mackie to claim that the mere existence of evil is logically incompatible with God's existence. Although I think that some atheists still do try to make logical problems of evil. But what's much more common nowadays is that the atheist will try to claim that the amount of evil that we observe, or the types of evil that we observe, are in some way evidence for atheism. The evils that we observe are supposed to show that God's existence is unlikely. In other words, the contemporary atheist philosophers aspire to make the problem of evil into inductive arguments. They don't aspire to make deductive arguments. That now brings us to Peter van Inwagen. Van Inwagen is a Christian theist philosopher who wants to give a response to a number of different problems of evil that the atheist might use. And in particular, he does want to respond to this inductive version of the problem of evil that claims that the amount of evil we observe and the kinds of evil we observe provide evidence against the existence of God. To give his reply, Van Inwagen first distinguishes between two types of replies that a theist might want to give to an argument from evil. On the one hand, the theist could offer a theodicy. A theodicy, according to Van Inwagen, is the theist's attempt to describe what God's reasons actually are for allowing evil. On the other hand, the theist could instead offer what Van Inwagen calls a defense. A defense is an attempt to describe what could, for all we know, be God's reasons for allowing evil if God were to exist. To present a defense, the theist does not need to claim that their story that they're giving is actually true. They do not need to claim to have actually identified God's reasons for allowing evil. All they need to do is give a minimally plausible story of what might be God's reasons. According to Van Inwagen, the theist does not need to give a full-fledged theodicy in order to adequately respond to the problem of evil. They do not need to claim to be able to discern God's reasons for allowing evil to actually occur. All they need to do is provide a defense. If a defense can be given, then that would be sufficient to show that the theist doesn't need to fear the problem of evil. Think about it this way. An argument from evil is an argument that is put forward by an atheist with the intention of showing that theism is irrational or shouldn't be believed. Therefore, it is the atheist's job to show that if God were to exist, then he couldn't have had any reason for allowing all of this evil to occur. Since it's the atheist's argument, they're the ones who have the burden of proof. They're the ones who are supposed to show that their premises are true. Now, for the theist, on the other hand, in order to respond to the problem of evil, their job is only to show that the argument doesn't provide evidence for its conclusion. To do this, they do not need to give God's actual reasons for allowing evil in the world. All they need to do is raise doubt about the premises of the argument. And to do this, all they need to do is give a story of what plausibly could be God's reasons for allowing evil, if God were to exist. If the theist can do that, then the problem of evil would not suffice to show that theism is irrational. All right, so that's Van Inwagen's aim. Van Inwagen's goal is to provide a story that could, for all we know, be God's reasons for permitting evil. Van Inwagen does not need to claim that his story is true. He just needs for it to be plausible. And that's enough, according to him, to show that evil does not provide good evidence for atheism. All right, so Van Inwagen's main line of defense, he calls it the free will defense. Basically, here's how his defense goes. According to his free will defense, it is tremendously valuable for God to create human beings that are endowed with free will. If God gives us free will, then he can no longer determine that we will always choose the right actions. Sometimes we will freely choose to do the wrong actions, and that will produce some evil. However, free will is supposed to be such a valuable thing that, all things considered, it is good for God to give us free will, and that good will outweigh some of the evils that will inevitably result when we misuse our free will. That's the basic free will defense in a nutshell. I'm just going to end this video by making a few comments about it. Firstly, notice that Van Inwagen's defense rests on the claim that God cannot give us free will and also give us characters so that we always desire to freely choose the right actions. He can't give us free will and also determine that we never do the wrong thing. Some philosophers, unlike Van Inwagen, think that it is possible for God to give us free will, and yet we are also disposed to always choose the right action. That's a controversy that occurs within the philosophy of free will, but we're not going to get into that here. Just keep in mind that the success of the free will defense does hinge on a controversy within the philosophy of free will. Secondly, Van Inwagen is well aware that his basic free will defense that I just described does not, just by itself, explain everything that needs to be explained with respect to responding to a problem of evil. For example, it doesn't explain why God would allow natural disasters, which aren't the products of human abuse of free will. We didn't choose for there to be natural disasters. So Van Inwagen still has to say more than he has, in order to give a full defense in response to the problem of evil. And in the rest of his paper, he does go on to do this. He gives something that he calls the expanded free will defense, in where he invokes some of the fall and redemption mythology that is familiar from the Christian religion. But I'm not going to go into the details of that, since this is, after all, supposed to be a short video. My main hope is that just by giving this short overview, it'll give you a sense of how the dialectic or dialogue between the atheist and the theist is supposed to work when it comes to discussing the problem of evil in a philosophical context.